Chapter 4. An Imagined World of Rules. Life is not as it appears. As neuroscientist Professor Chris Frith writes, our perception of the world is a fantasy that collides with reality. The dream state we exist in is founded on objective truth. We're alive on a planet breathing air under skies. But on these foundations, we build an infinite variety of imaginary games. Groups of people gather together, agree what symbols they're going to use to mean status, then strive to achieve it. These symbols might take the form of money, or power, or a plastic dumper truck in a kindergarten toy box. They might be a luxury logo, or some sexy abs, or an academic prize, or a gigantic yam. The dream of the mind projects value onto these symbols. So much value, we can be driven to fight and die for them. It tells us a story that says they're of glorious importance, that our gods are real, and our pursuit of them is holy. It makes us feel not like players of games, but heroes on journeys towards destinations of wonder. We believe this story. It's woven into our perception of reality. It feels no less real than the planet, air and sky. But the truth of human life is that it's a set of hallucinatory games organised around symbols. These games are an act of shared imagination. They come into being in the neural realms of those with whom we choose to play, our kin, our tribe, our people. These are the ones who truly understand us, who scratch the same meanings as we do into the walls of the world. And yet this description of human life remains incomplete. If our days only consisted of groups of people lunging madly at prizes, civilization couldn't function. Monopoly players play for symbolic Monopoly money and locations on a board and plastic houses and hotels, but you can't just grab at them. Players must adhere to precise codes of behaviour. And the status game is no different. It requires rules that players agree to. And just like its capacity for processing status symbols, the brain has an extraordinary capacity for learning and following rules. The rules by which we play at life are impossible to count. Most of the time, we're not even consciously aware we're following them. We just behave in ways we've learned are correct and judge ourselves and others, measuring, removing and awarding status by how well they're followed. These rules were invented by our ancestors, both recent and ancient. We know how to live successful lives today because we've inherited instructions from humans who've lived before us. Their rules tell us how we must act and who we must be in order to win. They're stored in two separate places. As the anthropologist Professor Robert Paul writes, there are two separate channels of inheritance at work in human life. Each channel contains its own set of instructions. The first was laid by our ancestors, who spent millions of years living in mobile tribal bands. This was the era in which our brains did much of their evolution. Everyone alive today is still coded to play hunter-gatherer games. These rules are stored in our DNA. Hunter-gatherer rules were designed for a specific purpose, to help keep our tribes functional and their members working together peacefully and well. A game was created in which pro-social behaviour that benefited the group was incentivised. Roughly speaking, the more you put the tribe's interests before your own, the more you'd earn status and the better your conditions of life would become. These rules were essential because humans can often be greedy, dishonest and aggressive. One survey of 60 pre-modern societies uncovered 7 common rules of play that are thought to be universal. Help your family, help your group, return favours, be brave, defer to superiors, divide resources fairly, and respect others' property. These elemental rules dictate the ways humans keep their tribes working well. They tell us basically how to play. Deferring to superiors means being deferential, respectful, loyal or obedient to those above you in a hierarchy, using appropriate forms of address and etiquette. Returning favours includes repaying a debt, forgiving people when they apologise. Dividing resources includes being willing to negotiate, compromise. These DNA rules are the outlines of human behaviour. They're our basic instructions for life. They're common to us all and represent our shared humanity. They're why, if you put an Eritrean stuntwoman, an Inuit shaman, and a Slovakian chess master in a New York hotel room, they'd be able to cooperate on a rudimentary level, and then after a while, an unstable hierarchy would likely construct itself, with one on the top and the others slotted beneath. This is just what happens when you connect humans into groups. The game emerges unbidden. The second set of rules comes from people who've been around more recently. They are encoded in culture. Every culture has a distinct set of rules by which it wants its members to live. We're judged by others as we judge ourselves by how well we play by them. Like the ancient DNA rules, they become so embedded into our perception that we barely know they're there unless someone violates them. Consider the pub. Most English people who go to the pub enjoy themselves without thinking about what they're actually doing. But pubs have myriad hidden rules. Anthropologist Professor Kate Fox has noted some of them. She writes, for example, that the bar counter of the pub is one of the very few places in England where it is socially acceptable to strike up a conversation with a complete stranger. An extension of this sociability rule applies to a limited extent near the dartboard and pool table, but only to those standing near the players. The tables in the vicinity of these games are still private. Other rules obvious to the English but not so to strangers include one or two people, not the whole group, go up to the bar to buy drinks. Once at the bar, there is an invisible queue that both the bar staff and the customers are aware of. There's a strict etiquette involved in attracting the attention of bar staff. This must be done without speaking, without making any noise, and without resorting to the vulgarity of obvious gesticulation. Regulars are permitted to break this rule, but only in a bantering style. Thanks or cheers must be said to the bar person when the drinks are handed over, and again when the change is given. The first commandment of pub chat is, "Thou shalt not take things too seriously." Even sticking to the same subject for more than a few minutes may sometimes be taken as a sign of excessive seriousness. And so on. Around the world, there are gigantic shifts in the way status games are played. These shifts can create some radical differences in self as brains form around local rules. Among the most studied are the differences between East and West. Westerners tend to see status pursuit as primarily the job of the individual. This moulds their strategies for playing the game. Psychologists find Westerners generally like to stand out and feel unique, tending towards conceited self-views and rating themselves better than average at all kinds of traits, including healthy habits, immunity to bias, and driving skills. In one study, 86% of Australians rated their job performance as above average. In another, 96% of Americans described themselves as special. East Asian games tend to be more collective. In countries such as Japan and China, status pursuit is more commonly seen as the responsibility of the group. They are more likely to feel raised up when they serve the collective, winning status by appearing humble, conformist, and self-sacrificial. In the East, it's often the status of the group above all. This is a game plan that might sound worthy and wonderful until you consider its ramifications for individual human rights. It can also mean cultural tension. When we travel to different continents, we sometimes experience culture shock as the behaviours we've been taught should achieve acceptance and status begin to fail. Westerners who pride themselves as being straight-talking, high-achieving and unique can be seen as immature and uncivilised by people in Asia. Over there, the concept of face is an essential component of the status game. Sociologist Professor David Yao-Fei Ho has defined 3 ways it's possible to lose face. When one fails to meet expectations associated with his or her social status, when one is not treated by others as respectfully as his or her face deserves, and when one's in-group members, for example family members, relatives, immediate subordinates, fail to meet their social roles. The Asian group-centred game can be radically different to that played in the West. There, if an employee is singled out for praise, their team can experience a loss of face. The praised employee feels not elated, but shamed and motivated to reduce their performance, deliberately doing a worse job so harmony and the group's face can be restored. Rules shift as you travel in geographic space, but also as you travel around in time. Different people in different eras would have grown up playing radically different games. Their variety can be found in popular books of etiquette that have been written throughout the ages. In 1486, Dame Juliana Berners laid out what kinds of birds it was appropriate for those of varying status rank to use when hawking. A yeoman could have a goshawk, a lady a merlin, an earl a peregrine, a prince a falcon, a king a gerfalcon, and an emperor an eagle. In 1558, Florentine etiquette writer Giovanni della Casa recommended to those sharing a bed with a stranger that it is not a refined habit, when coming across something disgusting in the sheet, as sometimes happens, to turn at once to one's companion and point it out to him. It is far less proper to hold out the stinking thing for another to smell, as some are wont, who even urge the other to do so, lifting the foul-smelling thing to his nostrils and saying, "I should like to know how much that stinks." The Chinese Book of Etiquette and Conduct for Women and Girls, first published in the West in 1900, but many centuries older, says to honour greatly your father-in-law. Before him let neither gladness nor sorrow show forth in your face. Dare not even to walk behind him. Stand not before him when you speak, but to one side or behind him, and hasten his every command to obey. When your mother-in-law sits, you should respectfully stand. Obey quickly her commands. These were playbooks for the game of life, and the rules that were codified in their pages would have felt as real and true as ours do today. Of course you should never walk behind your father-in-law. Of course a yeoman can't fly a gerfalcon. Of course you can't strike up conversations with strangers sitting at tables in an English pub. Knowing and following these rules would signal your position as a superior person. Flouting them would mark you down. The brain begins learning these rules in infancy. As 2-year-olds, we have around 100 trillion connections between our brain cells, double that of an adult. This is because when we're born, we don't know where we're going to pop out. Baby brains are specialised for many environments, many games. At this age, we're better than adults at recognising faces of other races and can hear tones in foreign languages that grown-ups are deaf to. But then, our brain begins to carve itself to its local environment. Connections start being culled at a rate of up to 100,000 per second. We begin to take the form of a player of our particular time and place. As we grow into childhood, these cultural rules and symbols are pressed into us by teachers and parents, with repetitive rounds of punishments and praise. Good boy, good girl. When we do the right thing, we feel ourselves soar. When bad, we fall. We develop a conscience with its dreadful currents of shame, embarrassment, guilt and regret, but that also allows us to surf joyful waves of pride. Our conscience provides us with a social mirror, writes the anthropologist Professor Christopher Boehm. By continually glancing at it, we can keep track of shameful pitfalls that threaten our reputational status or proudly and virtuously chart our personal progress. Up and down and up and down and up and down we go as we play at daily life. The rules and symbols of our time and place direct our beliefs, thoughts and behaviour. They define us. We begin offering status to other people when we judge them to be playing well by our own internalised sets of rules. When they fail, we withdraw it. We perform the game, acting it out with our muscles, beaming it from our eyes and singing it in our tone of voice. As well as being inside us, the status game is now outside us too, as we connect with other humans like us and together create a world of meaning in which to play. There's no opting out of the game. It's written into our brain and the brains of everyone we'll ever meet. Some try to cure themselves of status striving with meditation, but meditators can become notably pleased with themselves. A study of around 3,700 who'd practiced specifically to reduce attachment to the personal self and ego needs, such as social approval and success, found they scored highly in measures of spiritual superiority, agreeing with statements such as, "I am more in touch with my senses than most others. Because of my background and experiences, I am more in touch with my body than other people," and "The world would be a much better place if others too had the insights that I have now." Study leader Professor Ruth Vonk found the self-views they developed were the exact opposite of enlightenment. The only feasible way to opt out of the game is to seek an empty room and stay in it. In Japan, more than 500,000 adults suffer social withdrawal syndrome, refusing to leave their bedrooms unless absolutely compelled to. These hikikomori are incapable of following the rules of society, the sociologist Professor Tepai Sekimitsu has said. They find connection and status too difficult to reliably achieve, strongly agreeing with questions such as, I cannot blend into groups, and I am anxious about what others might think of me. Many stay locked up for years. Some die alone. And this, ultimately, is the choice facing each one of us. Hikikomori or play.